Stupid, deadly trends throughout history. There's this thing called social trends. You know this too. Whether it's collecting the latest useless collection product or participating in the how many dried baby carrots can you stick up your ass contest. There's no road humanity won't go down to fill our lives with things that make us go wow. And this situation has been this way since humanity's history and birth. Pole sitting. First, let's talk about the example of pole sitting we'll address. It sounds extremely absurd and boring, but for the people of that time who were severely deprived of dopamine, this was an incredible and fascinating thing. The practice of continuously placing butts on columns and poles goes back to the 5th century. Back then, a community of Christian men called stylites made it their mission to live on top of high columns. The term stylites comes from the Greek word stelos, and literally means column or pole. This wasn't for social entertainment. It was for the salvation of their souls. Perhaps history's most famous stylite was Simeon Stylites. Living uncomfortably and exposed to the elements at all times with minimal nutrition on top of his long small column palace in Syria, he believed he could essentially cast death from his being. This was a belief. Only his immortal soul would remain, ready for a first-class front-row seat ticket to heaven. That's what he thought. Because God loves watching his creations cruelly and mercilessly punish themselves for good boy points. According to some historical sources, Simeon remained on top of his column for a full 42 years until his death. Real dedication to the job. Or whatever you want to call it. It's up to you. Fast forward billions of seconds. In the 1920s and 30s in the United States, the practice of pole sitting returned. This time the purpose was different. It was to attract crowds. Like every trend, this one started with one person. That person was semi-professional showman Alvin Kelly. According to what's said, as a result of a friendly bet, Kelly's first public climb was in 1924 outside a store in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, when he sat for a few hours. Kelly's successful marketing strategy actually turned into a career he couldn't have predicted. He used his dubious talent to promote film screenings or sporting events, but eventually he himself became the main show. He toured 28 cities across the country, and people actually bought tickets to watch a man sit on a pole for hours. Hard to believe, but true. It was actually an amazing event. I guess people had a lot of free time. His personal record was a butt-numbing 49 days in Atlantic City, New Jersey. All this fame and attention paved the way for other people to join this trend. But of course, nothing lasts forever. Thanks to the Great Depression in the 1930s, when a few people started dying, the trend slowly began to die. Watching someone suffering and starving on a pole 200 feet above the ground is hard when you're also suffering and starving at ground level. By its nature, pole sitting was an extremely dangerous act. You had to balance yourself properly through sleep deprivation, harsh weather conditions, and inadequate nutrition. One slip or overcorrection was enough to convert all that potential energy into kinetic energy and give the audience a direct demonstration of gravitational acceleration. There was at least one verifiable death directly related to this act. Of course, this was years later in the 1970s. The unfortunate fallen man was 72-year-old professional pole sitter Richard Blandy. Respectable old Dick had spent a record-breaking 125 days on a pole in Stockholm, Sweden exactly 9 years before this, surviving mostly on whiskey and 3 packs of cigarettes a day, or what I call the stepfather special menu. In 1974, while finishing a 4-day promotional sit at Dixie Square Mall in Harvey, Illinois, a trailer accidentally came and hit his tower, causing the tower to collapse and Richard to fall to his death. Remember folks, the higher you go with this, the longer and harder the fall from the top, as you can see. Venetian Ceruse. Despite its very pleasant and beautiful sounding name, you probably know this. Venetian ceruse is a specific cosmetic mixture used throughout Europe in the 16th century. The main purpose of this product was to lighten the complexion of many gentlemen or ladies. It also served to cover blemishes and provide a flawless appearance as well as a refined look. Believe it or not, you know the desire to look lifeless like dough actually goes back to 2000 BC, to the ancient Egyptians actually. The rich ones, of course. You see, getting tanned and fit all day under the hot and suffocating sun are signs that you're a dirty, hard-working poor person. Not wanting to look like they worked at any job, Egyptian nobles applied lead-based powder to their faces to achieve the look of a food delivery person. You know, the nobility look. The desire for a more lifeless complexion crossed the Mediterranean to ancient Greek lands, where again, Noble people undertook to whiten their skin and cover skin imperfections. The trend continued to influence ancient Rome and even ancient China, all stuck to the lead-based recipe. Jump to the futuristic years of the century, and the beauty standard was still valid then, and right at that time the stage belonged to Venetian Cyrus. Perhaps one of the most notable historical figures to deal with this powder was Queen Elizabeth I of England. The exact cause of her death is a controversial subject, but historians estimate that the royal kicking of the bucket was a severe blood infection resulting from intensive use of lead-based Venetian Cyrus makeup. She used the powder not only to minimize signs of melanin, but also to cover severe scars from smallpox. Also, that was the fashion of the time. If you look at Renaissance paintings of that period, you'll see a lot of disturbingly white faces. It was the pinnacle of beauty. The best documented death directly resulting from Venetian Cyrus was arguably the beautiful baby Countess Maria Coventry. Her excessive use of this thing caused her own skin to crack and peel, creating painful open sores that she later covered with more makeup. She lost her life in 1760 at only 27 years old. So what exactly was this made of, and why was it so poisonous? First of all, the reason is lead. Lead is not good for you at all, especially when you apply it to your skin for hours or days. But lead isn't even white, but white lead is. This is white lead. Do you see how white it is? Quite white. This is hydrosuricite, a lead salt compound, also called lead carbonate hydroxide. It occurs naturally, usually found alongside pure lead deposits. So some Venetian guys in Venice decided to extract this stuff, crush it, and mix it with water and vinegar to create a paste. It was found to have incredible drying properties. So it was actually first used as a medical product in the 16th century, applied to disgusting, sticky, oozing open wounds and injuries to absorb fluids. But then I guess one person got a bit experimental and realized this could also be a great cosmetic. However, the problem with long-term lead exposure is that it seeps through the skin into your blood and causes lead poisoning. And any condition with the word poisoning in its name naturally doesn't have pleasant side effects. According to the World Health Organization, severe lead poisoning can cause a wide variety of symptoms. None of them are pleasant or healthy. There's the basic nausea and vomiting, of course, but also paralyzing headaches, memory loss, depression, and even high blood pressure in the short term. In the long term, we're talking about reproductive difficulties and even permanent brain and nervous system damage. Neurological effects frequently lead to increased aggression, hyperactivity, and a decrease in one's IQ. Scientific conclusion: heavy lead makeup causes a bunch of angry, furious, infertile, mentally deficient people. Dance marathons. Ever since people discovered a rhythm, they've been shaking their heads left and right and tapping their feet lightly on the ground. And the act of rocking usually lasts a few songs, which is a very normal situation. But how about dancing for days? Well, I can hear you saying, can it be that much? Dance marathons were very popular in the United States in the 1920s, but Americans should actually thank the British for this. In February 1923, professional dance couple Ali and Edgar agreed to dance English dance for 7 hours. Historically speaking, this had never really been done before, and attracted some national attention. But in true American style, they were about to surpass the British, who were trying to be good at something. New York dance instructor Alma Cummings, fascinated by the idea of evolving human expression while testing human limits, broke a very fast 27-hour dance record just 12 days after the British tried to be good. Something was happening in the United States in the 1920s. If you remember, the flagpole sitting craze was also reaching its peak at this point. Americans became obsessed with record-breaking feats of human physical endurance. So promotional shows became the norm. Normal people tried to achieve superhuman efforts. After Alma blew up the movement, the idea of endurance dancing began to take off. Over the next few weeks, the record was broken exactly 9 times across the country, so everyone started getting into it. It became a public spectacle. Organizers arranged dance marathons as a form of entertainment. You could pay a 25-cent fee and watch people dance live until dawn. Actually, a few dawns if you were lucky, that is. You see, it didn't take long for the craze to fall into a sequential fashion. Competitive dance marathons saw couples dance for days to have a chance to win solid cash prizes. When the world entered the Great Depression in the 1930s, the importance of these prizes became more valuable. In a bad and collapsed economy, these marathons were now seen not only as a form of entertainment for impoverished communities, but also as a tool for survival. The real reason for this was that participants were fed and housed properly and adequately in return for their performance, while they still had a chance to win the big prize. These prizes could range from a few hundred to a few thousand. Now, considering that the median income in the 1930s was about $1,000 per year, this was a big deal. So dance evolved from entertainment to desperation. Contestants were given only short breaks between numbers to catch their breath, but they still had to move and dance somehow, like a foot tap or head nod. Couples who remained motionless for too long were actually prodded with sticks or had water poured on them to get them back on their feet. Otherwise, they would be expelled and thrown into the streets. The era's most famous dance champions were handsome husband Callum de Villiers and beautiful baby Vonnie Kuczynski. Guess what, folks? How long do you think their record-breaking dance lasted? Think about it. Your time is up. The answer was a toe-evaporating 157 consecutive days on the dance floor for over 5 months. Their prize was $1,000. You tell me how much that is today. Not surprisingly, these endurance events didn't pass without consequences. As I said, people completely exhausted themselves to the point of collapse. Staying in the competition meant you had food, water, and shelter as long as you kept shaking that thing. Unfortunately, this resulted in several reported deaths across the country. How cheap is human life, right? You've seen what a person can do when desperate, haven't you? One of the first was 27-year-old Homer Morehouse. Just an amateur dancer, Homer was reported to have danced continuously for 87 hours, suffering from inadequate nutrition and extreme sleep deprivation. He stumbled to a chair to take a break and died. News of these deaths caused dance marathons to be immediately banned nationwide when they realized that voluntary human torture wasn't very humane. However, while organizers were making tens of thousands of dollars per event, piles of cold hard cash outweighed piles of cold hard bodies. Foot binding. Hold your toes. Why? Because this is going to be a bit disgusting and nauseating. As a warning, somewhere in this section there will be disgusting foot pictures. You can skip through that part quickly. The practice of foot binding, or otherwise known as Quanzhou, goes back to Imperial China days. Scientists can't exactly agree on an origin story. Some claim the practice existed in the 6th century, but most point to the 10th century under the Tang dynasty. It's believed that the first person to bind the feet of a courtesan of unique beauty was of course not of her own will. Emperor Li Yu, also called Topak, ordered the mentioned courtesan Yao Niang to wrap her feet with white silk to represent the crescent. She then performed an ornate dance on a golden lotus sculpture. The emperor was in awe of the grace and delicacy of the woman's dance. Naturally, other well-equipped women wanted to imitate this. Women forced their feet into more unnatural positions with the goal of creating what would later be called lotus feet. You know, like a daisy, small, delicate, and beautiful. Tiny feet were reportedly quite desirable because Chinese men thought this was undeniably sexy. Now, some historians believe the real reason was a bit more selfish. Look, this is what a real lotus foot looks like under the shoe. Yummy delicious, right? Now imagine trying to walk on these things all day. Did you? The truth is, walking on permanently deformed feet meant unbearable pain. This resulted in women walking very gracefully and slowly, if they walked at all. It has been suggested that the act of binding, while convincing women they were attracting suitable mates, was actually a form of control by limiting the mobility of men's wives. This, in a way, tied women to their homes, just like their feet were tied to their shoes. Think of it that way. This forced women into immobile, boring lives with nothing to do but trivial work like weaving and tapestry to help with household income. But how crushed were those things, you might ask yourself? And the answer is quite crushed. Ideally, the foot should be no longer than 4 inches or 10 centimeters. Ironically, the whole process was no small feat. Over months or even years, toes would be repeatedly broken and the entire foot would be folded downward and firmly placed under the sole to achieve the desired effect. Unfortunately, this was the sad reality faced by countless Chinese women over the centuries. Actually, no, not just adult women, but young girls too. I'm talking about girls as young as 4 or 5. Even now, you need to fold and shape those feet while growing. Have you ever been on the Living with the Land ride at Disney's Epcot and seen the Mickey-shaped growing pumpkins? Same principle, but with human feet. The binding of young girls' feet was practical not only physically but also in terms of discipline. It taught young girls that life is a painful experience and the importance of conforming to social rules and traditions. This practice continued from the 10th century to the 19th century. By that time, it's estimated that almost half of all Chinese women had their feet bound to some degree. If it's not clear, all that foot cracking and breaking didn't exactly come with health benefits. Forced deformation usually resulted in ulcerations. Disgusting wounds resulting from skin cracking were very difficult to treat properly. These led to fatal bacterial infections and gangrene, sometimes requiring complete amputation of the affected foot. Refusing to cut off a foot could result in being 6 feet underground. Foot binding began to slowly fall out of favor in the early 20th century. By this time, mass-produced textiles were taking over, leaving women who constantly worked from home unemployed, so they finally put their feet on the ground. After exhausting women's rights campaigns, the Chinese government took a step in the right direction by officially banning binding in 19... Intentional train crashes. Now, when you have something so broken it can't be fixed, have you ever thought about breaking it a little more to give it one last touch? Like throwing a broken light bulb into the trash to hear that satisfying glass breaking sound. I have a deep trash can at home. Well, no way, they used to do the same thing to full-size locomotives. Yes, if you had your own afternoon and a bit of spare change, you could slowly get your ass to an isolated part of the plains to witness a real high-speed train accident. But why? Because it looked really cool. Come on, don't do it. When you're driving on the highway and notice a wreck on the roadside, I know you turn your big stupid head 360 degrees like an owl to see the extent of the damage. We all do this. That's why we have traffic, folks. But this curiosity and amazement is an activity that attracted tens of thousands of spectators in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The concept was very simple. Starting in 1895, railway organizers somehow found a way to profit by decommissioning their equipment. Train engines, considered obsolete due to old or otherwise irreparable mechanical problems, were placed on a long stretch of track facing each other. Then established engineers would set the locomotives to full throttle forward and abandon ship before leaving. This allowed the laws of physics to become a physical demonstration. Audiences happily and joyfully threw up their hard-earned dollars to witness such a staged disaster. They were as excited as a Second Amendment enthusiast experiencing home invasion for the first time. However, the problem is that public safety measures at the time were nothing more than standing back a bit while the trains did their thing. Nowadays, it's common for crowds to gather at scheduled demolition sites to watch tall buildings become long no more. But at least safety nets are placed in front of crowds to catch any stray debris. Think about it. Even a small stone zooming in at hundreds of miles per hour could mean instant death. Well, this was a point that would be welcomed in 1896. Just north of Waco, Texas, there was the now infamous crash at Crush, a staged train accident that was more than the crowd bargained for. The planned crash would occur in the town of Crush. Crash creates meaning there now. The temporary town was built specifically for the event with an expected crowd of 20,000 Texans. However, thanks to effective advertising, 40,000 people showed up eagerly and happily waiting to see a delightful train crash. Now, this should have been a sign that these things wouldn't go as planned, of course. But twice the crowd meant twice the money, so the event stayed on schedule. 2 trains were positioned and sent on their way, reaching speeds of 50 miles per hour. The steam engines collided as expected, but at the moment of collision the boilers exploded violently with a boom. It didn't go as expected. The explosion hurled shrapnel in every direction, which naturally included where the crowd was standing. In addition to dozens of Southern men suffering some bruises and discolorations from flying metal pieces, at least 2 Texans unfortunately made their last yeehaws. But in an extremely surprising way, the crowd didn't flee. Instead, they quickly ran toward the wreck to assess the damage and take a souvenir from the twisted pile of metal for themselves. After all, they paid that much money to see a wreck, so they would get their money's worth. Despite widespread reports of the tragedy, the public didn't seem to care. In fact, these shows became increasingly popular and interesting. Events continued into the 1930s until the trend finally collapsed and burned out.